He didn't look like a hero anymore. Unshaven, tattered flannel, wrists in cuffs. They called him a drifter, a danger, a washed-up nobody. But when the doors to the courtroom opened, and a 4-star general in full uniform stepped inside, everything changed. This is the story of Master Sergeant Daniel Rourke, a man forgotten by the country he bled for, until the truth came crashing through those courtroom doors. If stories like this move you, stories of redemption, respect, and hidden honor, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop respect in the comments. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the streets of downtown Raleigh still shimmered beneath the glow of aging streetlights. Damp air clung to everything, including the breath of 2 patrol officers parked outside the 7-Eleven on Lexington. Inside their cruiser, Officer Mark Ellison sipped lukewarm coffee while his partner, Ramon Price, scrolled aimlessly through dispatch notes. Then the radio crackled. Disorderly conduct. Possible assault. Alleyway behind the Rusty Pint. Suspect still on scene. Without a word, Ellison put his coffee in the holder and flipped on the silent lights. They rolled through the light drizzle, turning left into the dim alleyway. The scene greeted them with something they'd both seen too many times. A young man holding his jaw, blood trickling down his chin, and an older man standing nearby, motionless. "Step back, sir. Hands behind your head," Ellison barked, stepping from the vehicle. The older man didn't flinch. He stood still, like a statue carved from a long-forgotten war. He wore a worn-out green field jacket, the kind issued to soldiers decades ago, paired with faded jeans and boots so scratched and dusty they looked more at home in a war zone than an alley in North Carolina. Price moved in cautiously, one hand resting near his taser. "Sir, we need you to comply." Still nothing. Just quiet, heavy breathing. Not defiance, something else. Something tired. The young man, maybe 22 at most, was still clutching his face. "He attacked me. No warning. Just slammed me into the wall." "Is that true?" Ellison asked, glancing back at the older man. The man remained silent. His gaze was distant, unfocused, not vacant, but far away, as if he was still in some other place, another time. They cuffed him with minimal resistance. He didn't curse, didn't struggle, just allowed it. He looked down at the wet asphalt, blinking slowly. "Probably another broken vet," Price muttered under his breath. "PTSD or drunk." They processed him back at the precinct. Name: Daniel James Rourke. No current address. No phone number. No emergency contact. He declined the public defender. Declined his phone call. Declined everything. The charge was listed as aggravated assault. The victim was Brandon Watts, a local college kid with rich parents and a history of bad decisions. No real witnesses, just a bartender who said she saw the older man walk into the alley and heard shouting. But there was no surveillance footage, just a one-sided story, and a man in cuffs who refused to tell his own. They scheduled his arraignment for Monday morning. By the time the courtroom doors opened at 9 a.m., word had spread among the courthouse staff. Another case of an old war vet snapping in public. Another man who wore a uniform once and now wore handcuffs. Courtroom 3C was already filling with murmurs before Rourke was even let in. The judge, Honorable Meredith Rowland, was flipping through documents when the bailiff brought him forward. He wore the same jacket from the arrest. His hair was slightly combed but still unruly. His hands were shackled in front of him. He carried no briefcase, no file, no lawyer. The room hushed slightly, not out of respect, but out of curiosity, like people staring at a train derailment. A man whose life had gone off the rails. "Defendant, please state your name," the judge said. "Daniel James Rourke," he replied, his voice gravelly but steady. "You're representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." The prosecutor, Assistant DA Alyssa Kent, rose from her table. Young, polished, and career-driven, she had already tried a dozen similar cases. This one would be quick. "Your Honor, the state is prepared to move forward. The defendant has declined counsel. The victim has submitted a written statement. We believe this is a straightforward case of unprovoked assault." The judge nodded slightly and turned to Rourke. Mr. Rourke, do you understand the charges against you? I do. Do you have any statement to present in your defense at this time? No, he replied. Not yet. Very well. The court will proceed. But the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud click. Every head turned. A man stepped inside. Not hurriedly, but deliberately, each footfall echoing softly across the room. He wore a deep navy uniform, polished buttons glinting under the ceiling lights. His shoes shone like glass. His chest carried enough ribbons to write a novel. On his collar, 4 stars. The bailiff straightened reflexively, as if every bone in his body recognized authority before his brain did. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge blinked twice. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence. The man didn't glance at anyone. He walked directly to the defense table straight toward Daniel Rourke. And then, in a room where civilians never saluted, he raised his hand and saluted the man in cuffs. I came to speak on behalf of this man, the general said, voice low but resonant. And I came to apologize. Complete silence fell over the courtroom. Not even the judge moved. The general turned to the bench. Permission to address the court, Your Honor? The judge swallowed hard, nodded slowly. Granted. The general faced the room again. This man, Daniel Rourke, served under my command in the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. He completed 5 combat tours. Silver Star. 2 Bronze Stars. 1 Purple Heart. He was part of Operation Crimson Sand and saved the lives of 12 American soldiers in a single night during a firefight that left 3 enemy combatants dead and 2 of our own gravely wounded. He turned to Rourke, voice softening. And he carried a 9-year-old Afghan boy on his back for nearly 4 miles through hostile territory to get him medical aid. The room was frozen. Even Brandon Watts, seated with an ice pack in the back row, stared ahead dumbly. I read the police report, the general continued. Said he disarmed a man attacking a woman outside a bar. No weapon. No permanent injury. No lethal force. He ended it in 3 seconds, exactly how we trained him to. He looked at the officers in the back. You cuffed a man who spent most of his adult life protecting people who never knew his name. Rourke said nothing. Still cuffed. Still silent. But something in his eyes had shifted, like fog lifting from a long-forgotten hillside. The judge leaned forward. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then, softly, remove his restraints. The bailiff moved quickly, fumbling slightly with the keys. The cuffs clinked free. Rourke didn't rub his wrists. He didn't stretch. He just stood straighter. Taller. The general looked him in the eye, and Rourke, after a long pause, gave the faintest nod. When the cuffs fell away from Daniel Rourke's wrists, it wasn't just the sound of metal that rang through the courtroom. It was something heavier, older, like history exhaling. Still, he didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the judge. His eyes were fixed on the general. The general, still standing at parade rest, glanced toward the bench. Your Honor, he said, voice composed but firm. Before this court proceeds further, I'd like to submit a sworn statement regarding Mr. Rourke's character and service. The judge nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. You may proceed. The general reached into the inner pocket of his dress uniform and produced a folded document. A court clerk stepped forward to receive it. But the general didn't stop there. He looked around the room, at the prosecutor, at the young man in the back with his swollen jaw, at every face seated in quiet judgment. I won't take up your time with stories of valor, he began. But you need context. Because if you're going to judge this man, if you're going to reduce his life to a case number, you should at least understand who he is. No one interrupted. Daniel Rourke enlisted in the Army in 1998, 2 months before he turned 18. Grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. No father. Mother died of lung cancer when he was 16. He didn't join the military for glory. He joined to survive. And once he got in, he became one of the most respected Rangers I ever commanded. He turned to the judge again. He served under me in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. He led raids that captured high-value targets. He disarmed bombs with nothing but a multi-tool and prayer. I once watched him drag 2 of his men out of a burning Humvee with his own back on fire. He let that sink in before continuing. When his 4th deployment ended, we tried to get him a desk assignment. Something safe. He refused. Said if the guys were going back out there, he'd go too. Didn't matter how tired he was, how broken his knees were, how loud the gunfire still echoed in his sleep. He paused, looking at Rourke. You never complained, never asked for anything, not even when command lost your Medal of Honor paperwork. That drew gasps from the gallery. Even the judge blinked twice. Rourke looked down at the floor. The general faced the courtroom again. Some of you are probably wondering why he's homeless. Why he walked into court wearing a 30-year-old jacket and those same boots. Why someone like him didn't get parades or plaques or a talk show interview. He gestured gently with one hand. Because real warriors don't ask for parades. They don't write memoirs or build brands. They come home and quietly carry what no one else can understand. The prosecutor finally rose from her chair. Your Honor, she said, clearing her throat. While I have deep respect for the general and his service, I don't see how any of this is legally relevant. The fact remains. Sit down, the judge interrupted, her voice not raised but absolutely final. A moment of stunned silence followed. The judge folded her hands in front of her. Please continue, General. He gave a slight nod. The arrest report says Daniel used non-lethal force. A single takedown maneuver. He didn't even bruise the other kid's ribs. He could have done far worse. That's restraint. That's training. That's professionalism. He looked directly at Brandon Watts, seated now with an expression that was rapidly shifting from arrogance to guilt. And I've read Brandon's record too. This isn't the first time he's harassed women outside that bar. But it might be the first time someone put him on his back for it. Murmurs spread through the gallery again. The prosecutor looked down at her notes. The judge tapped her pen against the bench, but said nothing. And you know what bothers me the most? The general said, voice harder now. That it took me 2 phone calls and 1 morning to uncover all this. But not a single person in this room. Not the arresting officers, not the prosecutor, not even the court. Took the time to learn who this man really is. He turned to the officers seated at the back of the room. You arrested the most disciplined man I've ever met. The same man who once stood in front of a school in Mosul to stop a suicide bomber from reaching a classroom of children. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably. The general looked at the judge once more. You asked him if he had anything to say in his defense. He said he didn't need one, and I believe that, because he's been defending others his whole life. Maybe it's time someone stood up and defended him. He stepped back, finally silent. For several seconds, no one moved. The air felt dense, heavy. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Rourke, do you have anything you'd like to say now? He looked up, eyes clear for the first time all morning. No, Your Honor, he said. The general said it all. She studied him for a long time. Then she turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Kent. Kent slowly stood. Her voice, once sharp and rehearsed, was now soft. The state is withdrawing all charges. A sound, almost like a collective exhale, swept through the courtroom. The judge nodded. Charges dismissed. This court owes you an apology, Mr. Rourke. And on behalf of this bench, I give it to you. Rourke said nothing. He didn't smile, didn't cry, just nodded once. As he turned to leave, the general stepped beside him. There's a medal waiting for you, he said quietly. 15 years late, but it's yours. Rourke exhaled slowly. The faintest smile crossed his face. Not for the medal, not for the apology, but maybe, just maybe, for finally being seen. And as he stepped past the last row of seats, something remarkable happened. People stood, not because they were told, not because of tradition. They just stood one by one. Some in guilt, some in awe, but all in respect. The courthouse emptied slowly, as if no one quite knew how to move after what they'd witnessed. Most days, the building echoed with impatience. Attorneys checking watches, defendants muttering under breath, bailiffs barking orders. But that morning something had shifted. The murmurs that followed Daniel Rourke out into the hallway were quiet, reverent. No cameras, no reporters, just a silence that somehow felt louder than applause. The general walked beside him without speaking. They hadn't seen each other in over a decade, but neither seemed surprised by the other's presence. Rourke didn't ask how Halvorsen had found out. The general didn't ask why Rourke had gone so long without reaching out. They both knew the answer. On the courthouse steps, the general finally broke the silence. "You look like hell, Sergeant." Rourke gave a dry grunt that might have been a laugh. "You should see the other guy." Halvorsen chuckled. "I read the report. Kid's lucky you didn't rearrange his entire dental record. He was drunk, loud, touching a woman who clearly didn't want it. I asked him to stop. He didn't. And then training took over." The general nodded, satisfied. "Still sharp after all these years." "Muscle memory," Rourke muttered. "That's all that's left." They stood there a moment longer, the cold wind tugging at the frayed sleeves of Rourke's jacket. The general glanced sideways at him, then motioned toward the street. "I've got a driver around the corner. You hungry?" "I'm always hungry," Rourke said. They ended up at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind with faded booths, handwritten pie specials, and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the Bush administration. The place was nearly empty, save for a waitress in her 50s and a trucker nursing black coffee at the counter. They took a corner booth. The general ordered a Reuben sandwich and coffee. Rourke just asked for scrambled eggs and toast. When the waitress walked away, Halvorsen reached into his briefcase and slid a thin manila envelope across the table. "What's this?" Rourke asked. The general leaned back, watching him. "Your Medal of Honor packet. Official. Signed. Sealed. Approved. Took me 15 years and a stack of memos thicker than a Bible. But it's done." Rourke didn't touch the envelope, just stared at it for a long time, then finally asked, "Why now?" Halvorsen shrugged. "Because I'm retiring next month. Because I had one last favor I could call in. And because I owed you." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," the general said, voice suddenly firm. "I left you in that valley. I followed protocol. I made the call that command demanded. But I still left you. And you paid the price." Rourke's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Halvorsen continued, softer now. "I read the therapist's notes from your discharge. You never told anyone about the boy in the minefield, or about what happened after we lost comms that night." "I didn't need to." "No," the general said. "But you should have." The waitress returned with their food, and for a while they ate in silence. The eggs were rubbery, the toast too dry, but Rourke cleaned the plate like it was a 5-star meal. Hunger wasn't new to him. Neither was eating without tasting. When he finally pushed his plate away, he reached for the envelope. He didn't open it, just ran his fingers along the edge. "Did you know they pulled me off the eligibility list back in 2012? He asked quietly. Halvorsen nodded. "Yeah, politics. I didn't care back then. Still don't." "That's a lie," the general said. "You didn't care because you didn't think you deserved it." Rourke looked up at him. "I read the full report," Halvorsen said. "You carried 2 men and a child out of that canyon, wounded, after a 9-hour firefight. You radioed in coordinates through a cracked transmitter with your ribs broken and your shoulder half torn off. You dragged yourself 2 miles on one leg because evac wouldn't land under fire. I lost 3 men," Rourke said, his voice low. "Doesn't matter what I did. They still died. And you saved 12 others." Rourke didn't respond. Halvorsen leaned forward. "You were never meant to carry that weight alone. That's not what command is. That's not what family is." "Family?" Rourke repeated, almost bitterly. "You think I don't know?" Halvorsen said. "You think I haven't buried men who called me sir? You think I sleep through the night?" They sat in silence again, the diner humming faintly around them. Finally, Rourke opened the envelope. Inside was a formal letter on Department of Defense stationery. His name in bold. The signature of the president at the bottom. A set of commendation notes. A scheduled ceremony. A bronze appointment pin. And at the very bottom, Medal of Honor, awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Rourke stared at it for a long time. "You going to that ceremony?" Halvorsen asked. "I don't know," Rourke said. "What the hell do I even say up there? Whatever you want. Or nothing at all. Just show up." The waitress brought the check. Halvorsen paid it without a word. As they stood to leave, Rourke folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Outside, the wind had picked up again, colder this time. Halvorsen turned toward his car, but Rourke didn't follow. "You headed somewhere?" the general asked. Rourke looked up the street. There wasn't much ahead, just some worn-down row houses, a small veterans outreach center, a bus stop. "I think I'll walk," he said. The general stepped forward and extended his hand. When Rourke took it, there was no salute, no ceremony. Just a firm, quiet clasp between two men who had bled under the same flags and buried the same ghosts. "If you change your mind," the general said, "the Pentagon ceremony's in 2 weeks. Wear the jacket." Rourke gave a half-smile. "This is the jacket," he said, pulling the flannel tighter. And then he turned and walked up the street, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds. Daniel Rourke walked with no particular destination in mind. The city hadn't changed much, but he had. Or maybe it was the other way around. Places have a way of staying the same while people come back different. Smaller somehow, like a shadow that no longer fits its original shape. He passed a shuttered bookstore, a laundromat with bars over the windows, and a pawn shop that hadn't changed its neon open sign in decades. The cold bit through his threadbare jacket, but he didn't mind. Cold was simple, honest. Up ahead, a blue and white sign caught his eye. Veterans Outreach Center Walk-ins Welcome. Rourke stopped. He hadn't set foot in one of those places in years. The last time, he'd filled out a form, waited 3 hours, and walked out without speaking to anyone. Words didn't come easy back then. They still didn't. But this morning was different. Maybe it was the envelope in his pocket. Maybe it was the general's voice still echoing in his ears. He stepped inside. The room smelled like stale coffee and floor cleaner. A small reception area sat near the front, empty except for a rack of worn brochures. PTSD resources, housing assistance, hotline numbers no one ever called. From a hallway off to the side, a woman's voice floated out. "Calm, steady. And when your benefits letter comes through, you'll want to bring it back here. Okay? We can help you schedule with the VA clinic." A moment later, a young man walked out of the hallway holding a folder and blinking like he'd just been told something human for the first time in months. He gave Rourke a nod as he passed, then disappeared out the door. Then she appeared. Mid-40s, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, sleeves rolled up above lean, scarred forearms. She wore jeans, a navy sweater, and a lanyard with a battered ID card. She stopped when she saw him. "You here for walk-in services?" she asked. Rourke hesitated. "Maybe." She gave him a look, not unkind. "Name?" "Rourke." "Daniel." Something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, or maybe just instinct. "Come on," she said. "Let's talk." She led him into a small room with mismatched chairs and a table scarred with burn marks from old coffee mugs. No computer, no clipboard, just a space. She sat first, folded her hands on the table, and looked him over. "You Army?" "Yeah," Rourke said. "Retired." She nodded. "Me too. Navy. Combat nurse. Fallujah, Ramadi. Lost count after Tour 3. Rourke gave a faint nod. "I'm Claire," she said, watching him closely. "I'm not a therapist. I'm not a caseworker. I'm just someone who's been through the mess and stayed alive long enough to help the next guy crawl out of it." He didn't answer. She didn't seem bothered. "Most vets come through that door after something breaks," she continued. "Marriage, job, court date, eviction. You don't look surprised by anything anymore, which tells me you broke a while ago. Rourke looked at the chipped paint on the table. Claire reached to her side and pulled out 2 paper cups. She poured coffee from a beat-up thermos. It's bad coffee, she warned. But it's free. He took the cup. She sipped hers first. So what brings you in today? I don't know, he said. Habit, maybe? She waited. I was in court this morning, he added finally. Charges. Dropped. That why you look like someone just took off your body armor? He raised an eyebrow. Most people leave court angry. Or smug. You look exposed. He didn't answer. Claire reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. You're not the first guy I've met who walked out of a courtroom wondering what the hell just happened. Sometimes justice feels like a bigger ambush than anything that ever happened downrange. He gave a slow nod. You got housing? She asked. Not stable. You sleeping in a shelter? No, he said. Usually in a church basement. Sometimes a truck. Claire didn't flinch. She just wrote something down. We've got a referral program, she said. Temporary apartment-style units. Just for vets. Private rooms. Clean. Quiet. Hot showers. I'm not a charity case. No, she said. You're a human case. And for some reason, the people who gave the most keep thinking they deserve the least. He looked at her then. Really looked. Not just at her face, but her posture, her tone, her way of making space for pain without needing to touch it. You ever lose people? He asked. She met his eyes. You mean over there? Or here? Both. Claire nodded. Yeah. Some bled out under my hands. Some overdosed back home. Some just faded. There was a long silence between them. Finally, Rourke reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope. He laid it on the table like a weapon, as if it might go off if he wasn't careful. She looked down at it. Didn't touch it. Medal of Honor, he said quietly. Claire's eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She just nodded. That yours? Apparently. You believe it? He hesitated. Some days, he said. Some days it just feels like a receipt for all the things I couldn't fix. Claire nodded again. It's not about what you fixed. It's about what you carried. They drank their coffee in silence. Eventually, Claire stood. I'm off in 20 minutes. You got anywhere to be? No. I was gonna swing by the unit on Pinewood. Show a new guy the place. Ride with me. Rourke stood slowly. Yeah, I think I will. As they walked out together, Claire held the door open for him. You ever talk about what happened? She asked as they stepped into the late morning sun. He shook his head. No point. She smiled faintly. Sure there is. It's not about fixing it. It's about not carrying it alone. Rourke didn't reply, but as the wind picked up again and the city moved around them, something inside him shifted, just a little. Like the weight hadn't disappeared, but maybe someone else could carry a corner of it for a while. The Pinewood Transitional Housing Unit was a quiet 2-story brick complex tucked behind an old grocery store, barely visible from the main road. It didn't look like much. Cracked sidewalk, rusted bike rack, a peeling sign out front that read simply, Veterans Welcome, but for Daniel Rourke it may as well have been a castle. Claire drove them in a beat-up Subaru Outback with cracked vinyl seats and a faint smell of peppermint gum and dog hair. She didn't talk much during the drive. Neither did he. That suited them both. When they pulled into the lot, she handed him a keycard and a small folder. Room 14B. End of the hall, 2nd floor. It's yours for the next 3 months, renewable if needed. No deposit. No lease. No questions. Rourke took the keycard with a nod. They climbed the stairs slowly, passing doors marked with faded brass numbers. A few veterans sat out front, some smoking, some just watching the trees. No one said much. Rourke recognized the posture instantly, that quiet alertness only other soldiers understood. Not fear, not paranoia, just readiness. Most of these guys are like you, Claire said as they reached the top. Didn't fall apart all at once. Just unraveled over time. She stopped in front of a tan door with chipped paint. 14B. Your neighbor's named Harris. Navy, I think. Keeps to himself. The guy across the hall plays blues guitar badly but means well. Friday nights we do group dinner downstairs. If you don't want to talk, just bring food. Everyone understands. Rourke turned the key. The door opened with a soft click. The room was small but clean. Twin bed with stiff linens, a dresser, a desk, and a private bathroom that looked like it had been scrubbed 3 times too many. A microwave sat on the shelf next to a stack of unopened instant oatmeal boxes and a welcome note from the center. Rourke stepped inside. Claire lingered in the doorway. "There's a binder in the desk drawer," she said. "Rules, emergency numbers, maps to the VA and the clinic. Nothing fancy, but it's a place." He nodded. She hesitated a second longer. "You're not alone anymore, Rourke. Doesn't mean it gets easier. But at least now you've got walls, a roof, and people who give a damn." With that, she turned and walked away, her boots making soft thuds on the worn carpet. He shut the door behind her. The silence in the room was deep. Not empty, more like waiting. Rourke dropped his duffel on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked around. The hum of a mini fridge in the corner filled the space with just enough sound to keep him from thinking too much. He stood up and walked to the window. It faced a chain-link fence and a patch of woods beyond. Not much of a view, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, he had a door that locked from the inside. That night, Rourke couldn't sleep. He lay on the bed in full clothes, arms behind his head, staring at the ceiling. The mattress was soft compared to concrete, but too soft for comfort. He missed the discipline of discomfort, the structure of exhaustion. At 2:14 a.m., a noise from outside snapped him alert. 3 thuds. Fast. Then a pause. Then a long, dragging scrape. He sat up instantly, eyes scanning, body already tense. He moved to the door without a sound and pressed his ear to it. Another sound. Something metal. A grunt. He unlocked the door silently and stepped into the hallway. Across from him, Harris, the Navy vet Claire had mentioned, was kneeling beside a collapsed walker. An older man, gray-bearded, was half-slumped against the wall, breathing hard. Rourke moved without hesitation. He knelt beside them. "What happened?" "Slipped," Harris said. "Coming back from the bathroom." Knee locked up on him. The man on the floor tried to wave them off. "Don't make a fuss. You live here?" Rourke asked. "Yeah, room 12A. Just got out of the VA 2 days ago." Rourke looked him over. No visible blood, but his breathing was labored. Diabetic, maybe, or just weak. He reached down, wrapped one arm gently around the man's back and the other under his knees. Without straining, he lifted. The man tried to protest. "I can walk." "You fell," Rourke said. "You're allowed to be helped." Harris opened the door to 12A. Inside, the room was more cluttered than Rourke's. Oxygen canisters, pill bottles, and half-finished crosswords. Rourke laid him gently on the bed. "Need me to call anyone?" he asked. "No. Just a little embarrassed is all." Rourke offered a small smile. "Happens to the best of us." Back in the hallway, Harris gave him a nod. "Thanks. Some guys wouldn't have moved." "Not moving's what gets people killed," Rourke said. Then he turned and walked back to his room. The next morning, Claire knocked at 10 a.m., holding a styrofoam container and 2 coffees. "You didn't show up for breakfast," she said, "so I brought it to you." He took the food, stepped aside, and she walked in without asking. "Smells like eggs and something that used to be bacon," he said. "Try not to overhype it." They sat at the desk while he ate. She watched him with that same calm curiosity she always had, like someone studying an artifact, not for its age but for its weight. "Harris told me what happened last night," she said. "Said you picked up Joe like he weighed nothing." "He didn't." Claire smiled faintly. "You sleep at all?" "No." "You want something for that?" "No." She let that sit for a moment, then said, "There's a guy from the VA visiting Friday. Comes once a month. Combat stress group. No chairs in a circle. Just coffee and real talk. You'd like him. Do I have to share?" "No." But sometimes someone else says something and you realize you needed to hear it more than you thought. He didn't commit, but he didn't say no either. Claire stood. Dinner's at 6. Chilly night. Tell Harris I made it, he'll show up. Tell anyone else and I'll deny it. As she opened the door, she glanced over her shoulder. You did good last night, helping Joe. That kind of reflex doesn't come from war. It comes from who you are underneath it. Rourke looked at her. What if underneath it, there's just smoke? Claire shrugged. Even smoke comes from fire. Just means there was heat once. And with that, she was gone. Rourke looked around the room again. Same four walls. Same humming fridge. Same broken sleep. But something felt different now. The silence didn't weigh quite so heavy. The folding chairs were old, mismatched, and just uncomfortable enough to keep people from slouching. The room smelled faintly of overcooked coffee and air freshener that couldn't quite cover the musty walls. It wasn't a clinic. No white coats. No intake forms. Just a circle of veterans, a dented coffee pot, and silence that stretched too long before anyone dared speak. Rourke didn't plan to attend. He'd told Claire as much the night before. But that morning, as he sat on his bed with the envelope still unopened on his desk, something in him itched. Not physical, not like a wound, but deep like a splinter that had gone too long under skin. So he walked downstairs. Quiet. Intentional. He didn't expect to stay. Claire was there, standing in the back with her arms folded. She didn't smile when she saw him, didn't say a word, just gave him a single nod and a slight tilt of her head toward the empty seat across the circle. Rourke took it. The man leading the session was short and broad, with a weathered face and gentle voice that didn't match his marine tattoos. His name was Ted. He didn't talk like a therapist. No jargon. No how do you feel about that nonsense. He just looked each man in the eye and waited until someone broke the tension. Today it was a guy named Will, Army, late 30s, first time at the group. He spoke haltingly about a friend who didn't come home, about the guilt of surviving when others didn't, about how quiet had become the most dangerous sound in his life. There were nods around the room. No judgment, just understanding. A man with a cane talked about nightmares. Another confessed he hadn't hugged his own kids in years. Rourke sat there, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the wall. He wasn't listening, or so he told himself. But when someone mentioned the heat of Mosul, his hand twitched. When another described watching a friend bleed out in a Humvee, he flinched. Then Ted looked at him. Daniel, right? Rourke didn't move. You're welcome to pass, Ted said. No pressure. But you came. That counts for something. There was a long silence. Rourke uncrossed his arms. I don't talk about it, he said. Ted nodded. Why's that? Because it doesn't fix anything. Maybe not, Ted said. But maybe it loosens something. Something stuck. Rourke looked around the circle. No one was leaning in. No one was staring. Just a quiet kind of presence, the kind that didn't expect, just waited. He exhaled slowly. There was a kid, he said. Afghanistan, 2009. The words came flat, rehearsed but barely ever spoken. We just pulled back from a failed sweep through the northern ridge near the Tangi Valley. We were exhausted, low on supplies. Half the radios were down. Command ordered us to fall back to the southern checkpoint. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. On the way down, we passed a village, small, maybe 50 people. Dirt homes. No electricity. Just goats and dust. As we were moving, I saw this kid, maybe 9 or 10, running toward us from behind a building. He was barefoot, bleeding from his leg, crying, limping, trying to yell in broken English. Rourke's voice dropped. I didn't think. I ran to him. I was halfway there when my radio came alive. Someone screaming, "Stop! He's in the field! Stop! He's in the field!" The room was dead still. Rourke swallowed. He'd stepped into a minefield. Old Russian mines. Buried shallow. No warning markers. Just soft ground and fate. He looked down at his hands. I froze. Couldn't move forward. Couldn't move back. I just stood there, maybe 5 feet from him, and watched as he tried to lift his leg. One man in the circle closed his eyes. I told him to stop, to sit. I tried to gesture, but he didn't understand. He kept trying to crawl toward me, crying. Rourke blinked slowly. And then, it happened. He didn't describe it. He didn't have to. The silence filled the gaps better than words ever could. I was blown backward. My ears rang for hours. We never found all the pieces. I told Command I never saw what happened, that it was too fast. But I did see. I saw all of it. His voice caught. He was just a kid. Ted let the silence sit. And you blamed yourself, Ted said gently. Rourke nodded once. I wasn't fast enough, or smart enough, or brave enough to save him. Ted leaned forward. That's what we all tell ourselves. That if we'd done one more thing, been one step quicker, 1 inch closer, someone would still be alive. But you didn't place the mine. You didn't arm the field. You didn't put that child there. The war did. Rourke didn't respond. You carried that moment, Daniel. For years. Alone. But it wasn't yours to carry by yourself. Rourke clenched his fists. His face. It doesn't fade. No, Ted said. But neither does the fact that you tried. That you ran toward him when anyone else would have run away. That matters. Another voice spoke, this one raspy. An older man across the circle. I had a girl die in my arms in Baghdad. I still hear her breath in my sleep. I used to think the sound would kill me. Now, I think it's what kept me alive. Rourke looked up. One by one, the others gave small nods. No platitudes. Just solidarity. Ted sat back. See, that's the point of this room. Not to erase what happened, but to let you say it out loud without fear that someone will flinch. Or judge. Or pretend to understand. Rourke exhaled deeply, not in frustration, but in release, like a held breath finally leaving his chest. Claire stepped into the room quietly at the end, coffee in hand. She looked at Rourke, then at Ted. He gave her a subtle nod. When the group broke up, Rourke lingered. Claire waited in the hallway. As they walked outside, she glanced sideways at him. You good? No, he said. But I'm lighter. She smiled. That's a start. They walked together in silence. And for the first time in years, Rourke didn't feel like the ghosts behind him were pulling him backward. They were just there. But he was still moving forward. The Pentagon auditorium was filled to capacity. Generals in dress uniform, senators in dark suits, camera crews lining the walls, and a scattering of civilians in the back, invited guests with creased invitations and wide, uncertain eyes. The air was formal, reverent, expectant. Everyone stood when the Secretary of Defense entered. When the national anthem played, hands touched hearts, heads bowed. And when the ceremony's centerpiece was announced, there was a brief hush, the kind that comes before something sacred. Today, the secretary said, standing behind a gleaming podium, we honor a soldier who asked for nothing, expected nothing, and carried more than any man should have to alone. Today, we correct a silence that has gone on for far too long. He paused. Master Sergeant Daniel James Rourke. The name echoed through the hall like a thunderclap. All eyes turned toward the side entrance. For a few seconds, no one emerged. Then the doors opened, and there he was. No parade uniform, no medals, just a black suit. Ill-fitting, borrowed, and the same boots he had worn for over a decade. His shoulders were squared, his steps slow but sure. And though his face betrayed years of exhaustion, his presence filled the room like a veteran returning to his post. Behind him, Claire stood silently, hands clasped in front of her. Next to her, General Halvorsen, now retired, stood ramrod straight in full dress uniform, for stars still shining. Rourke stepped up onto the stage. He didn't shake hands, didn't smile, just nodded once toward the Secretary of Defense and turned to face the audience. The medal rested on a velvet cushion in a glass case. The citation was read aloud. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty during Operation Crimson Sand, Master Sergeant Daniel Rourke demonstrated extraordinary heroism by rescuing 12 wounded soldiers under sustained enemy fire. The rest of it blurred in his ears, not because he didn't care, but because those words, polished and approved, would never truly capture the sound of screaming through smoke, the smell of blood and cordite, the feel of someone dying under your hands. When the citation ended, the secretary lifted the medal from its case. Master Sergeant, it is my honor to formally award you the Medal of Honor on behalf of a grateful nation. Rourke stepped forward. The medal was draped over his neck. The applause was thunderous, but Rourke didn't bow, didn't speak, just stood still, the medal resting over his chest like a weight he had finally decided to wear instead of bury. When the applause faded, the secretary offered the microphone. Would you like to say a few words? Rourke stepped to the mic. He looked out at the crowd. Not at the generals, not at the cameras, but at the handful of men and women scattered among them who knew. He took a breath. And then he said, "No." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. But he wasn't done. He leaned slightly toward the mic and added, "I've already said everything I needed to the people who understand it. And for those who don't, words won't help." Then he stepped back. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was profound. The secretary, clearly caught off guard, nodded respectfully. "Sometimes," he said into the mic, "no words speak loudest." The ceremony concluded. There were handshakes, photos, cameras flashing like distant explosions. Rourke endured it without expression, like a soldier standing for roll call. When it was finally over, he stepped outside, down the white stone steps of the Pentagon, and into the crisp afternoon sunlight. Claire was waiting. "You did good," she said. "I didn't say anything." "Exactly." Halvorsen walked up behind them. "You still have the same walk," he said. "Like you're expecting the next footstep to be a landmine." "Habit." Halvorsen pulled out a small velvet box. "You're supposed to get a second one," he said. "The medal you wear, and the one you keep." Rourke took it without ceremony and slipped it into his pocket. They stood together for a while in the parking lot. People passed them, some recognizing him, most not. A few whispered. Some nodded. One young Marine came up and said, simply, "Thank you, Sergeant," then left without waiting for a reply. Eventually, Halvorsen clapped him gently on the back. "If you ever want to teach at West Point at the academy, they'd take you in a heartbeat." Rourke shook his head. "I'm not ready to stand in front of a classroom." "Then keep walking," Halvorsen said. "But don't walk alone." He turned and left. Claire and Rourke walked toward her car. Slow, quiet. "You want dinner?" she asked. "I want pancakes," he said, surprising even himself. She laughed. "You know, there's a diner back in Raleigh that still makes them like they did in '84. I wasn't born in '84. "You're a liar," she smirked. They drove in silence for a few miles before she asked, "You ever open that envelope? The first one the general gave you?" "Yeah," he said. "It's in the desk drawer at 14B. You going to frame it?" He thought for a moment. "No," he said. "But maybe one day I'll show it to someone who needs to see it." She smiled. "I think that's exactly what it's for." They reached the highway. The world looked the same. Strip malls, billboards, American flags fluttering under fast food signs. But something inside him had shifted. The ghosts hadn't vanished. The guilt hadn't dissolved. But he'd finally given the silence a name. And as the medal pressed lightly against his chest, Daniel Rourke didn't feel honored. He felt seen. Thank you for watching to the very end of Retired Soldier Was Jailed. But when the general walked in, the courtroom fell silent. This wasn't just a story about a medal. It was about silence, survival, and the quiet strength that never asks to be recognized. Some heroes don't speak. Some carry pain they'll never describe. But sometimes, standing up again is the loudest act of all. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who sacrificed without applause, leave a respect in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that real strength lives in silence and service, help us tell more stories like this, one unsung hero at a time. Sometimes the bravest words are the ones never spoken. Endless stories,